I suggest we now move on to Eileen, who has a variant, I think, of that proposal, but with a slightly different twist on it. So Eileen, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. So yeah, so yes, Casper's right. So this is a project which is joint with Casper. So you can kind of see that he has influence on both my project and Mark's project. So this is about making the reporting function explicit. And the aim is, I think is to test assumptions about the subjective well-being scale. So the question that we're curious about is that the standard question that we're all familiar with now, having talked about it for 2 days already. So there is a link between the aspects of life and someone's reported life satisfaction. And then we sort of posit that there is a reporting function. So people act as if there is one. And one assumption that we wanted to test is the scale equivalence. So all respondents using this 0 to 10 scale in the same way. So the way that we wanted to test for that is a make your own vignette. So instead of going from aspects of, so instead of just asking people to rate their life satisfaction and then inferring like what could have been a correlate of it by doing some sort of regression, we like give them a number for life satisfaction. And we say, okay, so what aspects of life would you correspond with that number of life satisfaction? And from that, we can kind of infer it's kind of like the inverse, doing the inverse of the reporting function. And so here's a draft that a prototype we've made of a make your own vignette. So these are domains that are usually asked in subjective well-being. So these are like domain specifics. So things like marriage, having children, income, physical and mental health. So instead of using a tweet and open text method, like Mark was suggesting, actually Casper and I did an exercise where we tried to map everything to the scale, and we came up with really different responses. And we thought it would be easier for, like, cognitively easier for respondents to have some drop-down menus. So like each of these boxes here is like there's like a range of options that people can select, and they just choose the one that best describes them, because yes, it can be very difficult to code open text response, but we also to give people the freedom. And each of these options also has like a does not matter. So if, like, for example, like, oh, I've never thought about violent crime in my neighborhood because it just isn't relevant for me, I can just say like it does not matter. So that's the design of the vignette that we are planning. And the way that we can use this to test the assumption of scale equivalence. So we would compare, so across different respondents, we gave them the same number, so 3, and then we each got a vignette. They designed their own vignette corresponding to a life situation in which they would answer 3. And then we look for systematic differences across socio-demographic groups. So, I mean, it's quite obvious that no two people are going to say the exact same vignette, but we're just more concerned that, for example, richer people would need a higher income to say 3, for example, than poorer people. Then maybe there would be systematic differences there. And in terms of implementation with an actual survey, so ideally you'd want 11 vignettes per individual, so kind of like 11 tweets, like Mark was saying. But realistically, when we pilot this in people, they get tired after around 3. So we would choose like 2 random numbers or 3 random numbers and get people to fill in the vignettes for those 2 numbers only. And then in comparison with the traditional vignette method that has been discussed in the previous sessions, so we can construct some vignettes for like fictional people like Mark. Here he has, here's a description of some fictional guy and like using the fill in the blanks of our own vignette. And then we sort of get people to, this is the traditional method where they look at the vignette and then they say, okay, now like, how would I think Mark is satisfied with his life? And then we use, so the same features as I've said. And the way that we would compare it is to see whether ratings of traditional vignettes are equivalent to like respondents' choices of their own vignettes. So, if someone gave a vignette that was quite similar to Mark and he said like, oh, this is a 5. And then when you present him with a life quite similar to his own, and then you say, okay, so how satisfied do you think Mark is? And he also says 5, then there's, that would give some evidence that they're using a single reporting function to assess their lives and other people's lives. So that's basically all that I had. I think the main point was just to highlight the make your own vignette, which is slightly different from the traditional where there's a story made for you, whereas now we're getting the respondents to make their own, construct their own story for a number. So I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about it. And Casper, if you want to jump in, if someone has a question you want to answer, then feel free to jump in.